Hey everybody, and welcome to a different kind of video than usual. As you most likely read the title, my 10 favorite units in Wargame. But before I get into it, I want to make clear this is not the 10 best units or something. First of all, it's incredibly hard or nearly impossible to objectively determine such things. And third of all, in the end, it would most likely just be units of like 3 nations or something. And even then, it's most of the time it's very subjective anyways. So I thought, I'm gonna do my favorite units. First of all, I never did that, surprisingly enough. And yeah, these units, they all of them are strong, I'd say. None of them are like units that you never see or are just weak, but not all of them are necessarily like top tier or must use units. Some of them certainly are, but definitely not all of them, because some units just have a special value, I guess you could call it, to me, or like have some sentimental value, or just out of novelty's sake. And I'll explain it for each unit. But I'm curious. First of all, what are your favorite units, and why? Second of all, if you want, write down in the comments what you think my favorite or my top 3 or even top 10 favorite units are, and please don't cheat. And I'm just curious because I don't think it's very obvious as to what my favorite units are. But I think I did mention every now and then what my favorite unit is, but I don't think any of you would probably just know it. Maybe some of you may guess it, but I'm curious if some of you what you guys maybe think. And also let me know if you want me to do similar kinds of videos like this, maybe underuse or overuse or over, units that people think are strong but they aren't actually that strong. Or maybe, people think are bad but they're actually pretty good. Just let me know. So, anyways, enough of that. Let's get into it. My 10th. Oh yeah, I should also say that except for the number 1 spot, the number 10 to 9 spot is more or less roughly interchangeable, maybe. And I did this more or less on the fly, this whole list, so it's not very. It's a list that can maybe change from month to month, or So it's not. I'll at the end I'll do another like honorable mentions list or something. But let's just get into it with number 10. And on number 10 we have the Sneshka. I think it's Sneshka. Sneshka, it didn't always used to be like that. It used to be, I think it's a DLC unit for Eastern Bloc that came into Red Dragon with that first big DLC. At the start, it used to be an exceptional optic scout for like, I don't know, it's 60 or 70 points. And it was a noob trap. Like pretty much every, or nearly every exceptional optics vehicle in the game is. But it was just bad. But it was during the map patches that this unit got changed to good optics and down to 30 points. And without trying to toot my own horn here or something, I might want to add that I had some impact on that. Back then I was playing a good amount of Eastern Bloc, and I found that Eastern Bloc, it is decent, but it really, really lacks any kind of affordable recon vehicle that can at least somewhat fight on its own. I mean, if you just look at it, Eastern Bloc recon, they have decent recon infantry, though I think back then the Spezialaufklärer were pretty horrible. But none of the vehicles were like actually strong, and the T-55s had, I believe, 25% accuracy back then, maybe even not even the stabilizer. They were even worse than they are now. But other than that, all you have are these shitty BMP2s or BMP1s. Keep in mind this was 60 or I think maybe even 70 points. The PT-76 I think was also worse back then, but even now it's not that great. It had nothing like that, and that was also back. The only decent combat recon was, I guess, the Salamandra, but it's a helicopter and costs 80 points. And keep in mind it was back during the time where USSR was still somewhat meta, even though it was already overshadowed by mixed mechanized, but people were still playing it a good amount, and people used to to send BDR-88s, BDR-90s, BRDM-3s, and most importantly in mixed blue Hachinanas everywhere around the whole fucking map. So having nothing as a defensive option against it that is really efficient. Eastern Bloc was really weakened by that. So I was like, I was actually researching sort of a bit, because this is, I think, never really actually a serious vehicle that went into service, I should say. So it was more of a prototype vehicle, I think, with the radar and shits. And yeah, I sent like info and shit to Eugen regarding, you know, real life data backing up the change down to good optics. And that was that. Back then it was must include. Nowadays not so much anymore, because people don't sneak as much like these kind of Hachinanas vehicles around. But it's still a good unit, and in a 1 versus 1 deck, very helpful. Even in team games, it's just very versatile as well. It's not wheeled, sure, but it has 4 front armor, which is very useful against other autocannons. It is good as fire support, it's good as flank defense, it is good for pushing, and you know, even not offensively, like as a massive push, not that great, but even then, you know, having it in second line as fire support and then having optics on top of that, it is not too bad, for sure. On number 9, we have the HQ61A. Not the HA, the HQ. Hello? There we go. HQ61A. Now that is a unit you don't see very often, but it is mostly just because nobody actually plays Red Dragons. On paper, let's compare it to the Hawk, shall we? The Hawk is probably the closest unit you can compare it to. So, for the same price, you are a lot more mobile. You are vulnerable as well, sort of, but keep in mind that while you have less strength, you have much better off-road speed. However, keep in mind that you are wheeled, so you have a bigger speed penalty in forests, but you're still significantly faster. Also, road speed is very important. The biggest difference, or one noticeable difference, is you have only 1 missile, but you get 10% more accuracy, and that is massive. That is massive. For 60 points, for the same price, sacrificing 1 missile for 10% more accuracy, and effectively more survivability and much better maneuverability. This is a steal, basically, you know? It's sort of for free, since nearly every time you have to buy a supply truck anyways. Of course, there will be situations where that 1 missile can make a huge difference, when there's like a train spam, because after 2 missiles we have to reload for 20 seconds, whereas the Hawk only has to reload after 3 missiles. But effectively, it is still significantly better. It is not really OP, but I think it is very strong. And just simply by the fact that nobody plays Red Dragons, or mixed Red 4 unspec or modo, you don't see it very often. But I think if Red Dragons was meta in team games, or even 1 versus 1s, because of how affordable it is, you would really see this a lot more often. It is actually a very strong unit. Well, I don't have to say actually. I think many people will realize it when they look at the stat card, but that single unit can't save Red Dragons. And that is also not overshadowed, but since you also have HQ7 and the Igla buses, when it comes to AA, Red Dragons actually have some very nice options, and I still wish this had 2 front armor. Anyways, unit, my favorite unit, number 8, my 8th favorite unit, I should say, the Moderna. Well, partially just because you get fucking 3 per card. That is actually one of the bigger reasons, but also it is relatively cheap for what it does. In most scenarios, it is actually honestly just as good as a 2A5. It has less armor, it has less low rate of fire, but more often than not with super heavies, unless it's a Leclerc or a Commando or maybe a V4, you're very often just, you know, peekaboo-ing. It's not really a verb, but I'm just gonna use it as that. Meaning, either you're in a forest or in a smoke, cloud of smoke, a smoke cloud, whatever, and you're just peeking out, shooting, and immediately reversing back into cover, you know, and then waiting a bit, maybe waiting for the enemy super heavy to show itself, or maybe to just shoot so you can shoot back while it's reloading without getting hit in return, etc., etc. Meaning the rate of fire in many situations isn't as big of a deal. Now, personally, the autocannon is very, very useful, making it very good as infantry support, but I think it is a bit overrated for that. Mainly, it is 160 points. That one autocannon isn't gonna make a huge difference, but it is more useful as a defensive tool, meaning it can stun enemy infantry. Second of all, it runs out of ammo very, very quickly, which is probably good, because otherwise it would be kind of broken, which it arguably already is, considering the tank is at 3 per card, which isn't a big deal for Eastern Bloc, but certainly for Entente. But it also shares some very nice stats that nearly or practically all T-72s have, which is good speed and very good autonomy, which is always nice to have. You don't want to have a Commando that has 350 kilometers autonomy, or you want the Challenger, which is pretty bad when it comes to maneuverability, although the Challenger 2 isn't as bad as the other ones. But I think people somewhat overestimate the autocannon, but also overestimate the negative effect the rate of fire can have. Accuracy, of course, is a big problem, which is always a bit bad, because most of the time on Red 4 the low accuracy isn't as big of a deal. On super heavies at least, because 9 RPM auto-loaded mean in that you're very good in close quarters, but 8 RPM doesn't quite cut it, although at least it's auto-loaded. So that can be very frustrating, because when you're doing like peekaboo threats, most of the time it's not in very close quarters, they're relatively far away, so that kind of doesn't go very hand in hand with the low accuracy. But let's be real, the biggest upside of the Moderna is that it comes at 3 per card. On to my 7th favorite unit, and that is the Plamen. So this is, again, it's a top tier unit. It is too strong. Let's be real. It is too strong, and it's just ridiculously good. It does effectively the same job. It does basically the same job as a not the same job as a Buratino. Okay, it does the same job, just not as in a way not as effectively. What I'm saying here is, it is like a mini Buratino in a way that it can stun very effectively, although not as big of an area, and you need more missiles. But you have 4 loads on one Plamen, meaning 4 salvos a la 16 rockets, excuse me. But the main thing is, first of all, it is relatively accurate. So if it's too accurate, you just drive back, because all MLRS systems get more accurate the closer you are to the minimal range. So if you want to be less accurate, you just drive away. Second of all, it has a ridiculously fast aim time. I believe it is even 10 seconds. Meaning that it is very, very useful as a defensive tool, which is incredibly strong, because most MLR, let's say the Eurogun or the M270, they have 10 seconds aim time, but most of the time they're relatively far back. Or, well, they have to, because of the sort of high minimum range. But yeah, the Plamen has an aim time of 10 seconds, but meaning that they're so far back, meaning that by the time you give them the order, and by the time difference between giving the order to attack there and the rockets actually hitting the where you told them to, that is quite a big time difference. And if you're watching out for rockets coming from the enemy base, it is somewhat easy, or not easy, but it is certainly possible in many situations to just avoid them or lower the impact they have on your push. But the Plamen, it just being able to be so close to the front line and having a 10 seconds aim time makes it such a strong defensive tool, meaning as soon as you spot like the enemy push coming, you can use 1 or maybe even 2, they're not that expensive, Plamens, and just shoot where they're about to push, and everything is stunned and panicked, which means that either you're buying yourself time because the enemy might just fall back, or you can just destroy the push by your own units because everything is panicked. Or at the very, very least, you're massively reducing the impact of the push, or just the strength of the push, meaning you're not losing as many units, or he's losing more units at the very least in the push. And it's just, I think you've seen it yourselves several times. One very good example is, and maybe I'm not gonna be that lazy and I'm gonna show it you right now, is that 1 2 versus 2. No, I'm not showing because it's hard to show. But what I'm saying is, I had a 2 versus 2 with Turnak. It was like 1.5, 2 months ago or something on Highway, where I was playing Entente, where I was doing some weird M84A strategy, and we were playing against Balanced and I think Kia, and Balanced was on my side. And what I basically did is with one, I believe 2 Plamens at some point, I just kept the M1A2s constantly panicked, making them basically more or less unusable for Balanced, simply because M1A2s have a manual loader, and of course being panicked, long aim time, and horrible accuracy. Sorry again for stumbling over my words here, but it's just such a strong tool. And of course you can also use it offensively. Before you're pushing, you just tell it to fire the position and it stuns everything there. And it's not even that supply intensive, I believe. One rocket costs 21 supply, meaning that you need 1,344 supply to fully resupply this unit, which is not even a 30-point truck, I believe. Yeah, not even a 30-point. Yeah, like a single 30-point supply truck can easily resupply this and still have enough left over to like half repair a tank. That's very good. And of course you get 4 salvos out of 1 full load. And of course you can also smoke with it, which can be useful at times, but it's not, usually not what you buy it for. God, we're already going 17 minutes in. I thought this would go a lot quicker. Next unit. I can't type for anything. Commando's 90. I don't think I need to say too much about it. They're basically the best shock infantry in the game. The only thing that isn't that great about them is the 5-point transports aren't particularly great, and they have no IVs. The SLF PC is very, very strong for 10-point wheel transport, having 2 front armor and a Browning. Again, the 5-point transports aren't that great due to having only 1 front armor, and they have no transports with actual armament. But yeah, the main thing why they're so strong is usually for shock infantry. Okay, let me put it this way. There are like obviously 3 types of 10-man shock infantry: 15 points, 20 points, and 25 points. When it comes to Blue 4, most of the time, the 20-point shock infantry has either horrible anti-tank weapons, meaning M72 Law or some shit, or they have something like Carl Gustav and the shitty MG. And most of the time, only the 90s versions get the very good MGs like Minimi, but they also come with high-end anti-tank weapons like the Apilas. For example, Rima 85. Now, Rima 85 aren't particularly bad. They're pretty darn good. But with 25 points and not having any 5-point vehicles, and also the 10-point vehicles not being that great, they aren't particularly good for grinding or all-round purposes, you know? They're very good, don't get me wrong, but you still want something cheaper, or yeah, just for like grinding purposes and forced fights, etc, etc. And then there's the 15-point shock infantry that Red 4 has access to, which usually, or when it comes to Red 4, they're pretty good for grinding but have terrible anti-tank weapons, although when it comes to Mordschützen, they're actually pretty darn good. They should arguably be 20 points, but yeah, Commando's 90, which should be 20 points, let's be real here, just have two things going for them. Let's be more or less realistic. First of all, they're 90s versions and have access to the Minimi, being the best MG in the game. Second of all, their carbine didn't get updated with the carbine quote-unquote rework in the last actual patch that Wargame got. What I mean with that is, I believe the SAS are... Yeah, exactly. No, that's not what I mean. I believe... Yes, these... Yep, this is what the stats should look like, meaning same accuracy and shit, but significantly lower rate of fire. However, they just got skipped over and didn't get their primary weapons updated, meaning they still had their old stats, which were just ridiculously strong, coupled with the fact that I have the best MG, and for 20 points, good, very good actually, anti-tank weapon. Yeah, that is just perfectly fine for dealing with IVs, very accurate, good range, and still threatening enough to sideshot tanks that this just makes it's hard to put in words, but they're just in the sweet spot when it comes to all-around infantry. You know, Modschützen are very good for grinding, etc., but they're just horrible against vehicles, and they're just perfectly in the middle between Modschützen and Rima 85. The only thing that could be better is, of course, the transport selection, but that is already pretty good. So I'm sorry if I'm like stumbling over words, but this is just kind of hard to explain. But I think if you played enough with Commonwealth or watched my videos, then you know that Commando's line are just ridiculously strong. Yeah. On to the next unit. Oh yeah, Challenger 2. Again, I don't think I need to say too much about it. For whatever reason, pattern. This unit is also 3 per card. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. With 2 per card, to be fair, it would probably still be on this list. And that's simply due to the fact it has 23 fucking front armor. Now, what is special about 23 front armor? Well, first of all, it also dies to 30 AP heat shots, like a 22 front armor tank. But it doesn't die to 2 kinetic shots, no matter how much AP the enemy has. So why? Well, okay, so first of all, the formula for AP damage, for getting damaged by a kinetic weapon, I think I may have skipped the kinetic part in the last sentence. Kinetic weapons deal damage equal to, what's it again? Armor value, no, AP minus AV divided by 2 plus 1. Meaning, if a weapon has 30 AP and you have 20 front armor, it's 30 minus 20 is 10, divided by 2 is 5, plus 1 is 6. 30 AP kinetic deals 6 damage to 20 front armor, right? Now, if you do the same thing with 23 front armor, you'll see you'll get 4.5 damage. And as you may or may not know, 30 AP is also the cap for kinetic weapons. So it doesn't. So what this means is a M1A2 at 350 meter range will deal the exact same damage to a Challenger 2 as an M84A. Because for each 175 meter range below your maximum range, you get plus 1 AP to kinetic weapons. So at 350 meter range, which is, I believe, more or less the maximum visible range in forest, the M84A has just enough AP to scale up to 30 AP. But the M1A2 also scales up to 30 AP and not beyond that, even though it has much more base AP. Which is, which is also one of the reasons why the M84A is such a ridiculously good tank, especially in forests. And that means that no matter what tank you're facing, if your Challenger 2 is at full HP and showing the front armor to the enemy tank, it will never, or nearly never, with 95 to 99% chance, you will never get 2-shot up front. There might be a scenario where you get the ammo rack explosion critical hit. I honestly don't know if that can even occur by AP damage. It might only occur if you get damaged by HE weapons, but I honestly don't know too much about it. What I'm saying is, I'm pretty sure my Challenger 2 never got 2-shot up front by kinetic weapons. And that's just very, very powerful, because it honestly doesn't happen very often between good players, but sometimes there will be the situation where your 2 super heavies face off in a forest, and no other unit is close enough to support, meaning that they face each other, full HP, shoot at each other at the same time, and if the enemy tank is any super heavy but the Challenger 2, it will be dealt 5 or 5.5 damage, your tank 4.5 damage, then they reload, maybe your opponent gets a second shot off first, meaning setting you to 1 HP, but your second shot, unless you're panicked, by, let's say, Buratino, will definitely go off before his third shot, meaning that his tank will be dead and yours will be alive. Sure, you're at 1 HP, but assuming you can get out, it's obviously a massive advantage for you. I'm just saying this because most of you may just already know this, 90% of you, 80% of you, but I still get asked every now and then, what do you mean a Challenger 2 will never get 2-shot? What do you mean AP caps at 30, you know? It's just, every now and then, you know, obviously not everybody watches literally every of my videos, you know, barely anyone does, I'd be surprised. But some people, you know, obviously don't know that, and, you know, don't make fun of these people. Next up, on rank number 4, we have the CV90. The CV90 is just, in my opinion, the best heavy IFV, I guess you could say. I think the best IFV in general would probably be the BVP, but I just love the CV90. It's not just that the CV90 is good. It also comes with some very decent infantry, and being the Stormer, which were the Commandos 90 before the Commandos 90 were meta, I guess you could say. Also incredibly good 20-point shock infantry. But the CV90 is just so good. Even when the Marder 2 was released, or when the Marder 2 got nerfed first, maybe not at release, I would always prefer the CV90 over the Marder 2. Granted, the Marder 2 deals more, has more AP, has more range, has more armor, especially back when it's at 10 armor. But I'd still always go over the CV90 if I had the choice. Why? First of all, the AP and armor most of the time don't really matter. Unless you're in most scenarios you're just gonna shit on every enemy IFV anyways. The 6 armor is still plenty, 4 AP, 60% accuracy, 750 meter range is still very good. And the AP value most of the time doesn't matter. The armor value above 5 or 6 most of the time doesn't matter if you're an IFV. You know, if there's coming a tank, you can't penetrate it up front anyways, so the armor doesn't matter. Most of the time it's gonna be a 2-shot, you know. So these are just all stats that you pay for, but rarely get value out of. But the CV90 just hits that sweet spot of just having enough armor to survive for many non-high-end anti-tank weapons. You need 20 AP to one-shot the CV90, 21 for the Marder 2 when it comes to heat weapons. It has good accuracy, good rate of fire, not very good, but still good enough rate of fire. 4 AP, and coupled with 4 AP, you will kill basically most, or win against most IFVs up front, exception being a Marder 2, for example. And the rate of fire means that it's still very good against infantry. You know, if you played against XA185 KT spam, you know how good the Bushmaster 2 is. I don't have to tell you that. But CV90 is again one of these units similar to the Commandos 90 that hit that sweet spot between having high armor and being good against vehicles, but not sacrificing anti-infantry power. Like the Marder 2. The Marder 2 is very good against vehicles, but it's just not very good against infantry, especially also on top. I'm stumbling again over my words. Especially against infantry, it's just very expensive, and that makes it not very good against infantry. Against infantry, you need cost efficiency, and a Marder 2 is just not very cost efficient against infantry. It may very well be against vehicles, you know, but not against infantry. It just doesn't quite cut it. And the range and the range that you get, the extra accuracy and stabilizer, 90% of the time it doesn't matter against infantry. Against infantry, you're gonna be at 1200 to 300 up, from 300 up to 1200 meter range most of the time. Most of the time less than 1200, you know. And in that scenario, the accuracy value doesn't really matter. What you want is rate of fire. And I suppose HE, but a 1.5 HE doesn't really save it there. It still has significantly lower damage output than the CV90 against infantry. And of course, it's more expensive. And base Panzergrens are not on the same power level as base Stormer, so you're gonna spend another 5 points for Panzergrens 90. You could get it with the deck. Oh no, Deckungsgruppe don't get it anymore. Never mind. And on top of that, the CV90 you could also get with 15-point infantry if you wanted. Yeah, CV90 is just a very good unit. Even on its own, it's just for flanks, even, you know. Right, we're at the top 10. So I think some of you may have noticed this has to come at some point. ANX10 AMX10, yeah, AMX10. I'm mostly talking about the recon version. The tank version is very strong, but most of the time I can't really fit it in. The recon version is more useful anyways. Sure, the MX10 RC can just really fuck over enemy tanks by getting so close so quickly, and for 40 points, 16 AP at that speed is gonna be annoying. But the recon version most of the time is more has a bigger impact. For one, it's cheaper. Second of all, it has stealth and optics. And that's the biggest deal. I believe before it got buffed, it had 2 front armor and 8 RPM or 7 RPM, I believe. It wasn't really horrible, but the main problem was with only 7 RPM and 2 front armor, most of the time it just lost to autocannon vehicles. So that was very awkward. But right now it's just ridiculously good. It's so you can harass with it well, you can spam it. It's okay as fire support. With 3 front armor, it will survive long enough against most autocannons. 9 RPM is just good rate of fire. It's just for openers, there's basically nothing to counter it. You could argue, hey, well, there's the Vickers. Well, the Vickers has 2 front armor and 8 RPM. It has a stabilizer, sure, and more range, but it also costs 15 points more, has no optics and no stealth. The MX10 on top of that is also a lot more versatile. Flank support again, sneaking around, etc., etc. You get the point, I think. I remember it was like January or something last year, around the time where, for shits and giggles, someone suggested, "Hey, Raz, you're commodorized, play it." And I'm like, it's gonna suck, but I'm gonna try it. And after a couple of games, I realized how ridiculously strong the AMX10 is. Some or many may have realized it much earlier, but I didn't realize it before that. And I think I was pretty sure that it was strong, but I didn't realize how strong it was, or how OP it was, you know. It's the bane of Baltic Front, at least in a 1 versus 1. Although, to be fair, Baltic Front can, the best counter, quote unquote, to an AMX10 to AMX10s is just to not do a motorized opener. Is obviously you can't really guarantee, or you never really know if you're playing against Zero Current 1 versus 1 ranked, because you don't know what you're coming up against. But it's the best thing you can do. It's not an actual counter, but you're minimizing your losses, because most of the time they can't really do much against tanks. So what you get is you get some, as Baltic Front for example, you just get your Recon T55, which is good enough. Which is actually, oh no, never mind. I also got, it's not one-shotting, but it has kinetic, not heat. Sure, it's gonna be an uphill battle against someone who has like a better position than you, or is in your zone already potentially somewhat, but it's most of the time more efficient than losing all your wheeled stuff to AMX10s. Then again, this only really goes for if you know you're coming up against this. Yeah. King of wheeled openers, really. Or any, not any, but yeah, wheeled openers. Spot number 2, we already talked about this unit, M84A. I was thinking about also including the M1 Wilk, but I found it a bit redundant. The M1 Wilk has mostly some sentimental value, I guess you could say, to me. Back before Entente was in the game, it was like my favorite medium tank. I prefer it over the K1, mainly because of autoloader and 4HE. And I prefer the AP and armor value, the distribution. But M84A, I already mentioned it. It has just enough AP to scale up to 30 AP in forests, meaning that 2 of those will basically win against any super heavy, even against Challenger 2, because you have 2 targets. The Challenger 2 needs 4 shots to kill you. M84A needs 3 shots to kill the Challenger 2. And the speed, accuracy, autoloader of 9 RPM. It is just ridiculous. The only thing that it doesn't have is top armor, but cluster planes aren't that common. Laser guided bomb planes kind of are, and with only 3 back armor, even if the kernel sits behind you, there's a good chance you're gonna get very, very low, if not outright killed. Other than that, it doesn't really have any weakness. I have to say, I did underestimate the tank when it came out. I was like, for 10 points more, you get 1 more AP. Doesn't really sound worth it to me, but it's honestly mainly the speed. And that 1 extra AP does actually play a decent role, but the speed is such a... I really underestimated the speed in the tank itself, I admit. Yeah, it is just... It, in my opinion, it is the... If you could only choose a single tank in your tank tab, or like a single type of tank, meaning you could, let's say, 2 cards of it, I'd always go for the M84A. The M84A is, in my opinion, the only tank that is cheap enough to buy for like a quote-unquote weak flank of yours, or like a just protection of one of your flank where you don't have very many units. It's still kind of expensive for that, but it's still cheap enough and still powerful enough to be a reasonable threat to super heavies and use on your main front line and spam them and shit like that. And in my opinion, there's no other tank that does the same job. The M1 Wilk just doesn't quite have to punch through. It comes close, but doesn't quite have to punch through. The accuracy and stabilizer and speed, etc. can be quite noticeable. Something like a K1, obviously with 16 AP, is way too weak. Something like 2A1 is basically a M84A, but worse most of the time. Something like an M1A1 is just too expensive. Challenger 2 is too niche of a tank. Challenger 1 Mark 1, excuse me. The Magach is kind of there, but it doesn't have the same distribution. Well, it is a very good tank, arguably better than the M84A in certain situations, but it isn't as versatile. But the M84A is really the only tank that can't do that job, in my opinion. Yeah, it's just... I really underestimated that beast. That beast, excuse me. Yeah. So, on to my favorite unit. I wonder if you guessed it. My favorite unit is LSTR 40. Now, it is a very good unit. It is top tier for sure. It isn't quite what it used to be. It used to have 533 rounds per minute on the main weapon, meaning it was quite darn good against infantry. It's still very good against infantry, but yeah, it's just in the it's like one of the units where I think the SPW-80 would even be my favorite transport for it. A BDR-80A would probably be a bit too expensive for it. Something like the XA-185 KT maybe, but having the 2 front armor is actually quite nice. It is hard, and having the 20% accuracy KBVT on veteran, it is a threat is maybe an exaggeration, but it is somewhat reliable. And it's still cheap enough, you know, but I don't know. In any case, LSTR 40, obviously very good. They're just so versatile, and there's... I mean, obviously they're versatile, right? They have one of the best anti-tank weapons. They have second best primary weapon you could get, probably. I think the only thing that is better would be the G11, which is one of the few, or maybe the only remaining weapon with this range, accuracy, and SMG rate of fire. But you know, and it comes at 8 per card, which is quite a lot in my opinion. And at 50 points, you're not really spamming it, and it's honestly hard to run out. But at the same time, there's always... LSTR are never misplaced, you know. No matter where you put them, they're always useful. They're useful as sneaking around. They're useful at holding a position on their own, a flank, even if you want a frontline position. They're very good at backing up your infantry. You don't even have to micro them when the enemy uses infantry with fire support behind, because they don't have an MG, so they will always instantly fire up and pure. I have the Igla, which I would strongly prefer over a Stinger that the SAS have because of the extra range. And on Red 4 you always have like the 7 HE missiles of OSAS, Tors, etc. So the 4 or 5 HE difference in 90% of the time won't really make a difference. They mix very well with the anti-air, like I said. They being infantry, they can be very close to the front line, meaning that they are a huge threat to longbows. because most of the time your AA is significantly further behind the front line, so that the LSTR actually have a much higher chance to shoot at helicopters, most importantly longbows, which also has 8 HP, so the 4 versus 5 HE difference isn't big. They're just amazing. If I also prefer them over Eriko's Yarayayakari, mainly because they're in the infantry tab and come at 8 per card, whereas if you want 8 of those, you need to sacrifice 2 cards. They have, in my opinion, the better anti-tank weapon. They have obviously the better primary weapon. Well, not obviously, but I think this one is better most of the time. Diabolos, while obviously having 20 RPM, has significantly less accuracy, less range, and less AP. All 3 of those being very noticeable. AP most of the time, and not always, but especially range and accuracy. The 20 RPM, in my opinion, is not nearly as valuable as the range and accuracy. Also, you get 420 suppression. It's just obviously you don't have the stealth and optics, but LSTR 40, man, it's like honestly the only unit that makes me still want to play Eastern Bloc. Well, that is okay. That is not the right expression, because the fact that I feel always a little bit dirty when playing Entente and Baltic Front, which are basically better Eastern Blocs, both of them. The fact that playing those makes me feel dirty a bit also makes me play Eastern Bloc, because then I don't have to feel quote unquote ashamed for playing. But they're just, I'd always take them in the SPW 80. It's MI24D for 1 makes it more expensive, 2 you get less per card, and 3 that's just awkward to buy. If I had the ability to use 2 cards, I probably wouldn't even do it, while they are ridiculously good. Outside of a 1 versus 1, I'd probably not do it. I don't know, but yeah, I just, my favorite unit, my favorite infantry. I just love them. They're just so strong, and I don't think they are OP. Honestly, they should maybe be 40 points, because in my opinion they are just significantly better than SAS, which costs 35 points and which I don't even like using. I always take the Igler over Stinger. Maybe not as much in Blue 4, where you have more 5 and 6. More 5 HE AA, especially the Commonwealth with the rapiers. But most of the time I'm using them mainly against helicopters anyways, so that I nearly always would prefer the range, which is pretty low on the Stinger. Anti-tank weapon obviously significantly worse than Vampire, primary weapon obviously. And Lynx H7 is okay, but I would, SPW80 fits so well in my opinion. Not FGB, LSTR. So yeah, my favorite unit for sure. I don't think that that'll change ever, and it has been my favorite unit for a long time. If you're playing Eastern Bloc without these, you're doing something wrong. And those are my 10 favorite units. If you want me to do some, undervalued, overvalued, underused, etc., over, kind of units, let me know, make some suggestions, etc., etc. And yeah, before I forget, I wanted to do some honorable mentions. For one, the OSA line. The OSA line is, I don't think I need to tell you much. All of them are good. I prefer depending on the deck, I use AK or AKM. Base OSA is okay, but can be a bit awkward with only 4 missiles of 35% accuracy. But being so cheap, they're still very, very nice to have. But AK, if you have something, for example, in Entente, I prefer the AKs, because I always have the Sava as well, which is very good, so I don't necessarily need this to be as good against helicopters. Eastern Bloc, you could use both, but in Eastern Bloc, I think use the AKM. But both very, very nice to have. KWS being arguably the best ASF in the game when it comes to per card. 2 of those on veteran, ridiculously strong. I think the next best you get, I think the biggest contender for the single card ASF would be the Barak 2, which is just a much better Yak 1 for 1. But I think I'd still go for the KWS because having 3 of the long range missiles is just the right amount, or just the right minimum amount. 4 AIM-9Ls is maybe a bit too much. I think to make the KWS better, you'd have to reduce the amount of AIM-9Ls, because if you gave it AIM-9Ms, it would certainly cost more, and it would certainly not be a 2 per veteran, at 2 on veteran per card. KWS is probably, yeah, arguably the best ASFs when it comes to like price, card, value kind of thing, availability, if you get the point. Beacon, I don't think I need to tell you why. I talked more than enough about this unit. Then I kind of thought about putting it into the top 10, but the TGB 13. I talked about it in the Scandinavia deck building, but for 5 points, having this off-road speed on shock recon infantry, it is such a big deal. It is such a big deal, no joke. And we have the AMX 13, FL 15. It is very, very nice tank, very good fire support, 3 front armor, not the best MG, but it is so nice to have, and it has such a high burst damage with the, I believe, 6 round autoloader before it has to reload manually for a longer time. It is such a nice fire support unit. I'd probably, the main difference between why I would choose this over this one is, for 1, it comes in a tank tab, and 2, it has a much higher availability. I think if I could get the 30.1 with less AP and less range in a tank tab with maybe higher availability or something, I would choose this one, because it's mostly about the 3 HE, 13 RPM, and I guess 3 front armor, but mostly about the gun. The range isn't as big of a deal, accuracy not as much either, but very, very good tank. Then we have the Agach 7C Gimel, talked about it. For the same price as the M84A, you trade 2 armor for 2 AP, get 1 RPM as well, but you lose the autoloader. You're bigger, slower, less autonomy, but it's a very, very good tank. Honestly, just not overshadowed, but maybe not as obvious simply by the fact that you have the Merkava 2A, which is mostly your go-to medium tank in 1v1s. Then you have the Merkava 3B and Bass for the heavier duties, and that's just the main reason why I don't see the Gimel. As well as just having spikes and kernesses and shit to deal with medium tanks, you know? So I think that's just the reason why you don't see this tank very often, is because you have so many, more efficient, I guess, or more comfortable units to deal with medium tanks. Lasur, which I still prefer over the L17K, I talked about this a lot. The OG Hilo Hunter, I guess you could say. It's just the OBR 87 and 19. 87. Very, very solid 110 point tank. Sort of, again, not seen in Soviet decks very often outside of Armored, because you usually have like the OBR 89, and then as a cheaper tank, the B1 or the T72B. I don't know, I have a sweet spot for this tank. It's just very solid. It's not particularly great in anything, but it's just pretty good in everything, you know? Just not out, it's like jack of all trades, but master of none, you know? Then we have the Sava, you know, I don't think I need to mention why. Ridiculously strong. L15M, one of my favorite bombers. It's just way too cheap. If you just compare to the J7C, which is a decent bomber, but for 5 points more, you replace your anti-air missiles, which are pretty crap anyways, not as useful on such a fast, bad turn radius plane, for 2 cluster bombs. You get 20% ECM, you know? It's just very ridiculously good, you know? It's very versatile, you know? It's very good for sniping, it's very good for, if you know your enemy has units there, it's also just nice to have for just, you know, it's one of those planes, very often you were thinking, now I would really like to have cluster plane, and the reason why this is so good is it has HE bombs as well and cluster planes, making it so versatile, and being so cheap, you know, it's like the Hawk. It's still very good iron bomber, not like ridiculously impactful as an F111C, but good enough. And on top of that, it has the versatility of being able to finish off these 1 HP, 2 HP super heavies that sometimes get away, but you know where they are, but you just can't finish it off. But with those cluster bombs, it can finish us off, you know. Or if your opponent is using a lot of smoke rifle, buy 2, maybe even 3 if you have the points for those, and you're making life pain in the ass for the enemy. And on top of that, it reloads quite quickly. I'm talking way too fast, so I hope you still understand me. MiG-29, very good bomber. The fact that it has these having these the napalm as well seems to significantly increase the actual damage of the bombs, I feel like. And again, it's also versatile for just stopping the enemy of putting units into certain towns. It has high survivability, good short range missiles, and even though it has only 12 HE, it still does. It's still more. I feel like it is a lot more effective than an IDS, even when it comes to the actual impact without the napalm after all, you know. And I'm pretty sure it is a lot stronger than it may look on card. The CTC 85-3, it is not as good as it used to be in my opinion. Actually, it still has 7 RPM. Never mind. It's like a kind of little glass cannon E-tank, very good for peekabooing, you know. I have a sweet spot for this tank, but again, simply due to the fact that Red Dragons is not played very much, you don't really see this very often. And last but not least, M1 Wilk. I talked about it before, but yeah, there's a lot of what I'm doing with these noteworthy units is just telling you, hey, these are good units, you know. So that's why it was probably not very useful, but let me know what if you want to see any kind of. It doesn't have to be top 10, but kind of, you know, show us which units people always overlook and are actually pretty good or something along those lines. You know, tell me what you guys want to see. You know, in these terms of videos. Jesus, this is 15 minutes long. This is way longer than I thought. I thought it would be like a 15-minute video, you know. Anyways. If you watched until now, I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, let me know what you think. And I will hopefully see you next time.